Without a deposit, we can't schedule the surgery. The clerk's voice was kind, but the words were steel. Elias stood frozen at County General's billing counter, his wife's chart trembling in his hands. The screen glowed mercilessly. $18,400. That was the distance between breathing and goodbye. "I'll find it," he whispered. "Please. Just give me until morning." She nodded reluctantly. He turned, his maintenance uniform still smelling of floor wax and forgotten classrooms. Through room 214's window, Mara lay pale against white sheets, the woman who'd once stopped in the rain to help strangers. "Love first," she always said. "The rest finds a way." But standing there with empty pockets and a breaking heart, Elias couldn't see the way. He couldn't see that by midnight, he'd give his last dollar to save someone else's child. And he couldn't see the stranger watching him leave, who would change everything. Welcome to Nature's Shot Tales, where every story reminds us what truly matters. If this is your first time here, hit subscribe. You're joining a community that believes in hope, kindness, and second chances. Drop a comment telling us where you're watching from. Now, let's begin today's journey together. Elias had fixed thousands of things in his life. Broken locks, flickering lights, cracked windows. But standing at County General's billing counter, he realized some problems couldn't be solved with a wrench and patience. Without a deposit, we can't schedule the surgery. The clerk's nameplate read Patricia. She wore a cross necklace and had kind eyes, the sort that had delivered bad news too many times. Her voice carried the practiced gentleness of someone who knew words could wound deeper than scalpels. Elias's fingers tightened around Mara's medical chart. The paper felt thin, fragile, like everything holding his world together. The computer screen glowed between them. $18,400 remaining balance. 18,400 reasons his wife might not see spring. "I'll find it," Elias said, his voice barely rising above the hospital's ambient hum, the beeping monitors, rolling gurneys, hushed conversations of families bargaining with fate. "Please. Just give me until morning." Patricia hesitated. Her eyes moved from the screen to his face, reading something there that numbers couldn't capture. She'd probably seen dozens like him this month alone. Desperate spouses, exhausted children, parents who'd mortgaged their futures for one more day. "Tomorrow morning," she finally said. 8 a.m. "If we don't have the deposit by then." She didn't finish. She didn't need to. Elias nodded and turned away, his maintenance uniform still carrying the faint smell of industrial cleaner and the community college's old heating system. His steel-toed boots, resoled twice, good for another year at least, felt heavy as he walked down the corridor's polished linoleum. Through the rectangular window of room 214, he could see Mara. She lay motionless against starched white sheets, oxygen tubes tracing delicate paths across her face like translucent vines. Her brown skin had taken on a grayish pallor that terrified him every time he looked. The woman who'd filled rooms with laughter now seemed small, diminished, as if the illness were erasing her one breath at a time. He remembered her 3 months ago, vibrant, alive, conducting an invisible orchestra as she explained Beethoven to third graders who thought classical music meant movie soundtracks. "Music is just organized air," she told them, her hands dancing. But somehow, organized air can make you cry, or remember your grandmother, or feel brave enough to face anything. One of her students had raised a hand. Even scary things. Especially scary things. 2 days later, she'd collapsed between the piano and the window where sunlight pooled every afternoon at 2:15. Elias had never been a wealthy man, but he'd never considered himself poor either. Poverty, he'd learned, wasn't about what you lacked. It was about what you couldn't protect. He worked maintenance at Riverside Community College, a sprawling campus of aging buildings and persistent optimism. For 19 years, he'd been the invisible force keeping everything functional. Replacing door handles, repairing water fountains, patching roof leaks before they became catastrophes. The students didn't know his name, but they knew his work. Clean bathrooms. Working elevators. Classrooms that stayed warm in January. Mara taught music at Oakwood Elementary. She made $43,000 a year, not enough to be comfortable, but enough to sponsor instruments for kids whose families couldn't afford them. She'd come home exhausted but smiling, humming whatever piece she'd taught that day. They'd lived simply. A modest apartment near the college. Groceries from the discount store. Date nights that meant cooking together and streaming old movies. Their luxury was time, evenings on the couch, her head on his shoulder, comfortable silence that felt like conversation. They didn't have much, but they'd always had enough. Until Dr. Okonkwo had called him into her office with that expression doctors learn in medical school. Compassionate but clinical, human but distant enough to survive the job. Your wife has restrictive cardiomyopathy. The heart muscle has stiffened significantly. Without surgical intervention, a specialized procedure we'd need to schedule soon, her prognosis is... How long? Elias had interrupted. Weeks. Maybe a month. The word weeks had rewritten his understanding of time. Suddenly, calendar squares weren't just days. They were countdowns, subtractions, a mathematics of loss. The insurance covered 60%. Their savings, 12 years of careful accumulation, vacations postponed, repairs done himself, covered another 25%. That left $18,400. Elias had started selling things the day after the diagnosis. First went his tools, the professional grade set he'd assembled over 2 decades. Socket wrenches, power drills, levels that had guided his hands through 10,000 repairs. He'd sold them to a pawnshop owner who barely looked up from his phone. $300, the man had said. They'd cost $1,800 new. Elias took the cash. Next was his watch, a gift from Mara on their 10th anniversary, engraved on the back, "Time means nothing without you." The irony wasn't lost on him as he handed it to a jewelry buyer who examined it under magnification, hunting for flaws. 75. He took that too. Their car, a 2009 Honda with 160,000 miles but an engine Elias had babied into reliability, went to a used dealer who offered $2,400 and acted like he was doing them a favor. Each sale came with its own small grief. But nothing compared to the guitar. Mara's classical guitar had been her companion for 15 years. She'd bought it used from a retiring teacher, saved for 6 months to afford it. She'd taught herself to play, practicing until her fingertips developed calluses, until chords became muscle memory, until music poured out of her as naturally as breath. He'd found it in their closet, case dusty, strings slightly out of tune. The music store owner had tested it carefully, plucking notes that echoed through the shop. Beautiful instrument. 1,500. Elias had stood there, guitar case in hand, remembering Mara on their balcony at sunset, playing Recuerdos de la Alhambra, her face peaceful, her fingers dancing. She'd looked at him and smiled. This guitar has seen me through everything. Breakups. New jobs. The day I met you. I'll never sell it. Never. He'd asked. Never. Some things aren't for sale. He'd taken the $1,500. But even with everything sold, tools, watch, car, guitar, the wedding rings they'd agreed could be replaced, he was still $18,400 short. Now, standing outside room 214 as evening settled over the hospital, Elias stared at his empty hands. He'd fixed broken things his entire life, repaired what others had damaged, found solutions where others saw only problems. But this couldn't be fixed with duct tape and determination. Patricia appeared beside him, her shift ending, purse over her shoulder. "Mr. Grant." He turned. "Tomorrow morning," she said quietly. 8 a.m. "I'm sorry it has to be this way." She walked away, her footsteps fading down the corridor. Elias didn't enter room 214. He couldn't face Mara, couldn't let her see the defeat in his eyes, couldn't pretend he had answers when all he had were exhausted possibilities and evaporating time. He turned and walked toward the exit, past the gift shop closing for the night, past the chapel where someone was praying, past the cafeteria where staff grabbed late dinners between shifts. For the first time in his life, Elias didn't know how to fix what was broken. Elias didn't go home. Home meant an empty apartment where Mara's coffee mug still sat beside the sink, where her reading glasses rested on the nightstand, where silence had replaced laughter. Home meant facing the truth that he'd failed the only person who'd ever made him feel like he mattered. So he walked. The city at night became a different place. Sharper, lonelier, stripped of daytime pretense. Streetlights flickered like dying stars, casting pools of yellow across cracked sidewalks. A convenience store's neon sign buzzed and sputtered. Open 24/7, the view burned out months ago, nobody bothering to fix it. Elias understood that burned-out letter. Some things broke and stayed broken. The November air bit through his jacket. His breath formed small clouds that dissipated quickly, there and gone, there and gone. He passed closed shops with security gates pulled down like sleeping eyelids. A tattoo parlor. A check-cashing place advertising loans in 3 languages. A pharmacy where he'd once picked up Mara's prescriptions back when prescriptions were the worst of their problems. His feet moved without direction, carrying him through neighborhoods that shifted from commercial to industrial to forgotten. Empty lots. Abandoned warehouses. The skeletal remains of a playground where swings moved slightly in the wind, chains creaking like old bones. He thought about the guitar. Mara had played it the night before her collapse. Some Spanish piece she'd been learning, full of intricate fingerpicking that sounded like water running over stones. She'd messed up the same passage 3 times, laughed at herself, tried again. "Why do you keep playing it if it's frustrating you?" he'd asked. "Because the hard parts are where the beauty lives," she'd said. "Easy music doesn't change you." He'd sold that beauty for $1,500. And it still wasn't enough. The bus terminal appeared after midnight, a fluorescent island in the darkness. Inside, the waiting area held the city's displaced, night shift workers catching a few hours of sleep, travelers stranded between destinations, people with nowhere else to go. The air smelled of burnt coffee, disinfectant, and that particular exhaustion that settles into public spaces after dark. Elias sat on a plastic bench bolted to the floor. Around him, humanity in its most vulnerable state. An elderly man clutching a trash bag of possessions, a teenager with headphones and tired eyes, a woman reading a water-damaged paperback under harsh lights. Then he heard it. A quiet sob, barely audible beneath the terminal's ambient noise. The distant rumble of buses, a janitor's floor buffer, the static hiss of departure announcements. He turned. Near the vending machines, a young woman hunched over a toddler wrapped in a thin blanket. The kind of blanket given away at emergency shelters, faded blue with white stripes. The child's breathing came in shallow, labored gasps. The woman's face was streaked with tears, her eyes red and swollen, her hands trembling as she held her son. She couldn't have been older than 25. Her clothes were clean but worn, jeans with frayed hems, a jacket 2 sizes too large, sneakers held together with duct tape. Elias recognized that tape. He'd used the same kind to repair his work boots last winter. He should walk away. He had nothing to give. Less than nothing. He was drowning, and drowning people couldn't save others. They just dragged everyone down. But his feet moved anyway. "Ma'am." His voice came out rougher than intended. "Are you okay?" She looked up, and in her eyes, Elias saw his own reflection. Desperation, fear, the particular exhaustion of loving someone you couldn't protect. "My son," she said, her accent placing her somewhere far from here. "He has asthma. Very bad. The inhaler. It's empty. The pharmacy, they say I need money first. I have some, but not enough. They won't help without." Her voice cracked. The toddler wheezed against her chest, each breath a small struggle. "How much?" Elias heard himself ask. $43. She said it like confessing a crime. "I have 21. I asked people. No one." She stopped, composing herself with visible effort. "I understand. Everyone has their own problems." $43. Elias reached into his pocket. His fingers found the bills there. $67. His last money. Bus fare home. Food for tomorrow. The pathetic remnant of everything he'd sold, everything he'd sacrificed. Money that wouldn't save Mara. Wouldn't even make a dent in $18,400. But it could save this child. His mind raced through brutal mathematics. If he gave her the money, he'd have nothing. He'd still fail Mara. He'd fail her and be broke. The logical choice was clear. Walk away. Preserve what little he had. Focus on his own crisis. But logic had never been good at measuring what mattered. He thought of Mara. Not her illness. Not the machines. Not the ticking clock. He thought of her 3 years ago, pulling their car over in a rainstorm because someone's minivan had broken down on the highway shoulder. They'd been late for dinner reservations. Their anniversary, the one nice meal they'd planned all year. Eli, we have to help, she'd said, already opening her door. Mara, we're going to be soaked. We'll lose our table. She'd looked at him with that expression. Not angry, just certain. Love first. The rest finds a way. They'd helped the stranded family. Missed dinner. Ate gas station sandwiches in wet clothes. Laughed about it later. The rest had found a way. Standing in the bus terminal, Elias pulled out the bills. All of them. He placed them in the woman's trembling hands. Here. Take him. Get what he needs. She stared at the money, then at him, her face cycling through disbelief, confusion, overwhelming relief. But, what about you? You look like you need. I'll figure it out, Elias said softly. It was a lie. He had no idea how he'd figure anything out. The woman began to cry, not the quiet desperation from before, but something raw and grateful and disbelieving. She stood, clutching her son with one arm, the money with her free hand. You saved my baby, she whispered. You saved him. Elias shook his head. No. You did. I just helped. She shifted the toddler higher on her hip. What's your name? Elias. Thank you, Elias. Her voice broke on his name, making it sound sacred. I will never forget this. Never. God will. God will remember you. She moved toward the exit, toward the 24-hour pharmacy 3 blocks away, toward hope that hadn't existed 5 minutes ago. Elias watched her disappear into the night, carrying her son toward breath, toward tomorrow, toward the future he'd just purchased with his last $67. He sank onto the bench. The terminal's fluorescent lights hummed overhead. Someone's phone rang. A bus engine started outside, pulling away from Gate 7, taking people somewhere he couldn't afford to go. Elias pulled out his phone. The screen glowed in the dim space. 1:47 a.m. Mara's contact photo smiled at him. Taken last summer at the community college's barbecue, her holding a plate of potato salad, laughing at something he'd said. She looked so alive. So permanent. His thumb hovered over her name. He couldn't call. Couldn't let her hear the emptiness in his voice. Couldn't tell her he'd given away their last hope for someone else's child. Instead, he whispered into the empty air around him. I tried. The words felt insufficient. Pathetic. The sound of someone who'd fought and lost, who'd sacrificed everything and saved nothing that mattered most. But somewhere in the night, a toddler was breathing easier. Somewhere, a mother was crying tears of relief instead of grief. He had solved no problems. His wife still lay dying. The deadline still loomed. And yet, he had saved a life. Morning came with the weight of failure. Elias walked back to County General as sunlight crept across the city, turning windows into mirrors, casting long shadows that stretched behind him like ghosts. He hadn't slept. His eyes burned. His body moved on autopilot, each step requiring conscious effort, as if he'd forgotten how walking worked. He took the stairs instead of the elevator. 7 flights that left him breathless, postponing the inevitable moment when he'd have to tell Mara the truth. Room 214's door stood slightly ajar. He pushed it open. Mara was awake. Not just awake, sitting up. Her color had returned, the grayish pallor replaced by something closer to life. Her eyes tracked him as he entered, and in them he saw concern, love, that particular way she'd always looked at him when she knew he was carrying something heavy. "Eli," she said softly, "you look like you walked across the world." He tried to smile. Failed. Sat in the chair beside her bed that had molded to his shape over the past weeks. Something like that. She reached for his hand. Her fingers felt warmer than yesterday, stronger. For a moment, he let himself imagine this was just a regular hospital stay. Appendicitis, maybe, or a broken bone. Something fixable, something insurance covered, something that wouldn't end in a billing office's cold calculations. Before he could speak, the door opened. Nurse Chen entered, the one who always worked mornings, who'd learned how Mara liked her pillows arranged, who'd been kind even when Elias asked the same questions repeatedly because fear made his memory unreliable. "Mr. Grant," she said warmly, checking Mara's vitals monitor. "I wanted to inform you that your wife's surgery is scheduled for this afternoon. 2 o'clock. Dr. Okonkwo will perform the procedure personally." The words took several seconds to register. Elias blinked. "I'm sorry, there's been a misunderstanding. We don't have." "It's already been taken care of," Nurse Chen said, adjusting Mara's foreline with practiced efficiency. The room tilted. "What? Your balance has been paid in full." She smiled at him, then at Mara, as if delivering good news instead of something impossible. Anonymous donor. Everything's settled. Elias sat frozen. His brain struggled to process the information, kept rejecting it like a computer encountering corrupted data. Paid. Anonymous. Full. That's not possible," he whispered. Nurse Chen checked her tablet. It was processed this morning at 6:47 a.m. Cashier's check. $18,400 exactly. The donor specifically requested that Mrs. Grant receive immediate care. The number, that specific devastating number, spoken so casually, as if it were nothing. As if someone had simply decided that Mara's life was worth saving and made it happen. Who? Elias managed. Who did this? Anonymous means anonymous, Mr. Grant. They didn't leave a name. She headed toward the door, paused. "But the administrator mentioned they'd seen you here yesterday. Late at night. Looking defeated, I think was the word." She left, pulling the door closed behind her. Elias sat motionless, staring at his empty hands, the same hands that had given away $67 to a stranger's child, that had sold everything valuable he'd ever owned, that had fixed 1,000 broken things but couldn't fix the one thing that mattered most. Except someone else had. His breath came in short gasps. Tears blurred his vision. The dam he'd been holding back for 3 months. Since the diagnosis, since the first doctor's visit, since the moment life had become a countdown, finally broke. He pressed his palms against his face and sobbed. Mara's hand found his shoulder. "Eli." Her voice carried concern, confusion. "What's happening?" 10 minutes later, hospital administrator Ms. Rodriguez arrived carrying a manila envelope. "This was left at the front desk," she said gently, handing it to Elias. "For you." He opened it with trembling fingers. Inside, a single sheet of paper, handwritten in neat script. "I saw you leave this hospital last night with your head bowed and your hands empty. You looked like someone who had given everything. I didn't know your story, but I knew your love was real. Please let this help you finish the fight you started. Stranger." Elias read it 3 times. 4. The words blurred and refocused. Blurred and refocused. He held the paper like something sacred, something that might dissolve if he gripped too hard. "Eli." Mara's voice pulled him back. "Talk to me." He looked at her. His wife, his partner, the woman who'd taught him that love wasn't a feeling but a series of choices made in moments when choosing anything else would be easier. "I helped someone last night," he said quietly. A woman at the bus terminal. Her son needed medicine. She couldn't afford it. I gave her the last money I had. Mara's eyes widened. All of it. All of it. He laughed, a broken, bewildered sound. It wasn't enough to save you. But it was enough to save him. So I gave it to her. Tears slipped down Mara's cheeks. And this morning, Elias continued, his voice breaking, someone did the same for us. A complete stranger. They saw me here, broken, and chose kindness. He handed her the note. She read it slowly, her lips forming the words silently. When she finished, she pulled him close, and they held each other while the hospital hummed around them. Monitors beeping, footsteps passing, the ordinary sounds of life continuing despite everything. Then it was worth it, she whispered against his shoulder. Every bit of it. I don't even know who they are, Elias said. Maybe that's the point, Mara replied. Maybe love works best when it's anonymous. When there's no debt. No obligation. Just grace. At 2:14 p.m., they wheeled Mara toward surgery. Elias walked beside the gurney until they reached the double doors marked authorized personnel only. Dr. Helen met them there, scrubbed and ready, her eyes conveying the practiced confidence of someone who'd performed this procedure successfully dozens of times. We'll take good care of her, she said. Elias nodded, unable to speak. Mara squeezed his hand one last time. See you on the other side. The doors swung closed. The waiting room became Elias's universe. Beige walls, uncomfortable chairs, a television playing news no one watched. He sat, stood, paced, sat again. Other families occupied other corners, each trapped in their own anxious bubbles. 3 hours stretched into eternity. He prayed, something he hadn't done since childhood, words stumbling out awkwardly, a conversation with someone who might not be listening but who he desperately hoped was. Please, please. I gave what I could. Someone gave what they could. Please let that be enough. At 5:43 p.m., Dr. Helen emerged. She was smiling. The surgery was a success, she said. Her heart responded beautifully. Recovery will take time, but her prognosis is excellent. Elias's knees buckled. He caught himself on a chair, breathing like he'd surfaced from deep water. She's going to be okay, he whispered. She's going to be okay. 6 weeks later, Mara sat on their couch wrapped in the blue blanket they'd bought on their first anniversary. Color returning fully to her face, strength rebuilding slowly but steadily. Elias brought her tea, chamomile, the way she liked it, with honey from the farmer's market. You've been different, she observed, accepting the mug. Different how? Quieter. But also, more present. Like you're paying attention to things you used to miss. She was right. He'd started noticing, the elderly neighbor who struggled with groceries, the student who always ate alone in the cafeteria, the janitor at the college who worked double shifts to support his family. Small acts became his currency. Carrying bags. Offering lunch. Listening longer. He donated anonymously to the elementary school's music program. Stopped for stranded drivers. Left generous tips for exhausted servers. Not because he expected miracles. Because he'd witnessed one. He never learned the stranger's name. Never discovered who'd saved Mara's life. Some mysteries, he realized, weren't meant to be solved. They were meant to be honored by becoming the answer for someone else. Years later, standing before a classroom of maintenance students at Riverside Community College, Elias would often pause during his lectures about systems and repairs. There's something more important than fixing things, he'd say. Never let a problem to be solved become more important than a person to be loved. Because love has a way of solving problems you never could. The students would nod politely, not quite understanding. But somewhere in the city, a child who'd almost died in a bus terminal was graduating high school. His lungs strong, his future bright. Somewhere, a woman played guitar again, teaching music to children who couldn't afford instruments, her heart beating steady and sure. And somewhere in the quiet spaces between strangers, the world became a little better. Not through wealth or power or logic, but through the mysterious mathematics of mercy, where giving everything away somehow multiplied into more than enough. Thank you for watching. If this story touched your heart, please subscribe and share it with someone who needs hope today. Your support helps us create more meaningful stories. Tell us in the comments, what moment moved you most? Until next time, remember, love first always.